Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Amherst. I'm Reverend Michelle Buheit, the minister of the congregation. We are so glad you have chosen to join us in worship. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we affirm that we need not think alike to love alike, meaning that we are a faith community woven together in shared covenant rather than a conformity of belief. This is the covenant that binds our congregation. Together we promise to gather in compassionate community, to celebrate diversity of thought and unity of spirit, and to seek wholeness for ourselves, our children, and our world. If that sounds like the kind of community that you've been looking for, please see our website, uuamherst.org, and get to know us better. We begin our worship together by lighting the flaming chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism that embodies the light of reason and the search for truth and meaning, the warmth of friendship and community, and the fire of our commitment to bring more compassion and justice to a hurting world. If you have a chalice or a simple candle at home, please prepare to light it as we light our sacred chalice. February is Black History Month, so we center Black voices with this chalice lighting by Kristin Harper. Each day provides us with an opportunity to love again, to hurt again, to embrace joy, to experience unease, to discover the tragic. Each day provides us with the opportunity to live. This day is no different. This hour no more unique than the last. Except maybe today, maybe now, among friends and fellow journeyers, maybe for the first time, maybe silently, we can share ourselves. The seventh principle of Unitarian Universalism affirms and promotes respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. In recognition of all that connects us, we offer words of gratitude and responsibility. The campus of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Amherst sits on 11 acres of land that was claimed and taken by white settlers from the Haudenosaunee, who took it from the regional indigenous people known as the Neutrals. We acknowledge that we have benefited greatly from that which belonged to others, and in a very real sense belongs only to itself. May we be good stewards of the land and teach ourselves and others to live in right relationship with the living earth. Today I am happy to share the virtual pulpit with my friend, Kristin Chambers. Kristin and I met at the turn of the century, around 2001, at the UU congregation of Jamestown. We took turns offering services for that lay-led congregation, and eventually she helped pave the way for me to attend seminary and pursue professional ministry. In addition to being a good friend, Kristin has been a professor of social work, spent many years as a youth and family counselor, and retired in 2017 from writing training programs in the social services for the Center for the Development of Human Services at Buffalo State College. She and her husband, Ed Miner, live in Hinsdale, New York, and are the proud grandparents of 3 wonderful girls. Kristin will share some of her experiences and reflections supporting racial justice efforts through Black Lives Matter.
In the state of Alabama, during the early 60s and the mid-60s, there were several hundred thousand of Black people of voting age, but very few were registered to vote. As a matter of fact, in the heart of the Black Belt, in Selma, a small town in Alabama, that had only about 2.1% of the black people of voting age registered in 1965. Today in Selma, more than 70% of the blacks of voting age are registered to vote, and 5 members of a 10-member city council happen to be black. In Greene County, Alabama, during the early 60s, very few blacks were registered, but today that county is controlled by blacks. The highest elected official of the county is a young man, Thomas Gilmore, who is the sheriff.
Stand up and make good trouble. Speak up and make good trouble. Get up and make good trouble. Rise up and make good trouble. Stand up and make good trouble. Speak up and make good trouble. Get up and make good trouble. Rise up and make good trouble. Stand up and make good trouble. Speak up and make good trouble. Get up and make good trouble. Rise up and make good trouble. Never be afraid to make some noise. Make some noise. Never be afraid to make some noise. Make some noise.
This is the struggle of a lifetime.
Make some noise.
Makes good trouble. This is the struggle of a lifetime. Make good trouble. This is the struggle of a lifetime. And make good trouble. This is the struggle of a lifetime. And make good trouble.
So you tell us to wait. You tell us to be patient. We cannot wait. We cannot be patient. We want our freedom and we want it now.
Our opening reading today comes from Nelson Mandela. I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way. But I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I can rest only for a moment, for with freedom come responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not yet ended.
Well, welcome, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here as a guest in your pulpit. A few months ago, I was the guest speaker at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Jamestown, which is my home congregation, even though I moved away a decade ago. During the autumn months, I attended a weekly Black Lives Matter vigil held in Ellicottville. It was the natural for my reflection then, and what I've got to say today is a version of what I talked about back then. Why Black Lives Matter, you might ask? Well, as a Unitarian Universalist, as a feminist, and as a human being, I felt and continue to feel a moral imperative to stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, to bear witness to the grotesque history of our country related to all peoples of color, and to demand that this be a time of reckoning and a time of real change. Not too long ago, I naively expected that the national and international uprisings following that video of the George Floyd lynching on May 25th last year would compel the police to holster their guns, to engage in some deep soul searching about what they were doing, to see themselves and be horrified by what they saw. But the police killings have continued. The video of that murder, The unapologetic cruelty of that officer lit a match under all people of conscience, although clearly that murder was no anomaly. Black communities have continued reason to fear the police. On September 24th, a grand jury indicted a detective on 3 charges of first-degree wanton endangerment for firing blindly into an apartment and endangering neighbors, but not for killing Breonna Taylor, pictured here, a 26-year-old EMT who was asleep in her bed when she was shot to death. A friend, Kathy McGoldrick, started a weekly vigil in Ellicottville right after the Floyd killing. I joined her when that grand jury in Louisville, Kentucky wasn't even tasked with bringing murder charges. And that's surely what it was for Breonna in her own bed. It has to stop. This has to stop. Now, hanging out on a corner in Ellicottville with my friend Kathy was not a bad gig in the fall, although it has become awfully cold and windy of late. Sometimes there's even a party-like atmosphere. Kathy plays protest music, people are honking their horns in solidarity, and the group gathered there feels a transcendent bond. It's especially heartening when young people lay on their horns, pump their fists, and even yell support out their car windows. I'd say about 50% of the people who drive by us are supportive. And it's especially poignant when the rare Black motorist drives by with her family and her passengers look out the windows and make the heart sign with their hands. Then there are the troglodytes. They aren't always in pickup trucks, but often. Some still scream, "Trump 2020." Others yell things like, "All lives matter," to which we respond, yes, that's the point. We are not saying that Black lives matter more than white or blue lives. We are saying that until Black people know justice, no one knows justice. Justice and equity for all is one of our UU principles. Justice for some is not justice. That's just privilege. At our vigil, one guy, who has recently obtained for himself a bullhorn, regularly yells out his truck window, "Get a job!" That's just an amazing response to a small group of people standing outside on a frigid afternoon holding picket signs. I had to think hard as to what cognitive contortion produced that garbage. I think it must be to him that people with the time and inclination to assemble at a peaceful vigil must actually be radical democratic socialists who are also somehow on the dole. Well, I am on Social Security. I wonder if that counts. Did I lose my free speech rights when I accepted Social Security? Then there are people who are downright ugly, offensive. Mostly it's men, and mostly they are in trucks, and they somehow feel compelled to flash their middle finger at us or gun their trucks and smoke us with their stinking black exhaust. It's disgusting. I can't fathom it. It has gotten worse since January 6th. There's a more palpable anger out there. One man came up to Kathy and asked her, "Why are you still doing this?" And she explained the moral imperative to keep this message alive. And he said, "But don't you know there are people here who would like to shoot you?" And we admitted to one another that there is some anxiety every time a car slows down. Are they trying to read our signs? Or are they thinking about running us down? The worst by far was the man who bellowed out the window of his truck, "White lives matter more." Yes, white lives matter more. That was gut-wrenching to hear. That person, that bruised, twisted person actually spat out the words that define the behavior of American institutions. The gross thing is, in some ways, he's right. Structural racism is embedded in American life in everything from who gets to live in the nice neighborhoods, to who gets to go to the good schools, to who gets interviewed and then hired, to who gets the higher wage, to who gets the business loan, to who gets to drive a nice car. even to who gets to shop in a pricey store without being followed. One of structural racism's terrible realities is that Black wealth in America is less than 1/10 of white wealth. Black ownership is roughly 30% lower than white home ownership. Let's look at how our government reinforces structural racism. As one example, the Small Business Administration doled out $23.2 billion in loans in 2019. But when it comes to Black-owned businesses, the figure drops to $755 million. That's not even 4% of the total, even though Blacks own 9.5% of the businesses in America, this according to the Census Bureau. Or at least they did before the pandemic. 41% of Black businesses ceased operations last April, as opposed to just 17% of white. Just another way this pandemic highlights structural racism, by landing disproportionately on the shoulders and the backs of Blacks. Another obvious and especially egregious example of structural racism is the way it informs how police and prisons operate. Blacks comprise 12% of our population, but 48% of the prison population. A 2016 study showed that 1 in 3 Black boys born in 2001 can expect to be incarcerated at some point in his life. 1 in 3. Between 1990 and 2005, a new prison opened in the United States every 10 days. Prison growth and the prison industrial complex, that is the business interests that capitalize on prison construction and then on prison populations, made imprisonment so profitable that millions of dollars were spent lobbying state legislators to keep expanding the use of incarceration to respond to just about any problem. Healthcare problems like drug addiction, poverty that led someone to write a bad check, child behavioral disorders, managing the mentally disabled poor, and immigration issues fueled the explosion in the numbers of people we lock up. We lock up more people than anywhere else in the world. An analysis by ProPublica found that over a 2-year span from 2010 to 2012, young Black men were 21 times more likely to get shot by police than young white men. 21 times more likely. We white liberals have for too long ignored the structural and institutional racism at the root of these deaths. I've heard arguments to dismiss it and set it aside, to, in effect, adapt to the disproportionate killing of unarmed Black men. There are many ways to do this, but the most insidious is when we blame the victim. We say things like, well, they should have made better choices. And yes, some of these young men should have made better choices. The thing is, white people make bad choices too, and we don't pay for those mistakes with our lives at anywhere near the same rate. White people aren't incarcerated at the incredibly high rate for their bad choices. You can see by this slide the disparity in police response. So no, it doesn't matter if Michael Brown may have just stolen cigars from a convenience store. Shooting in the back and killing an unarmed teenager for stealing cigars and then trying to run away from the police is not the appropriate response. It doesn't matter if George Floyd tried to pass a bad $20 bill. We don't know, he may not even have known it was bogus. He was unarmed, and there was no reason, no justification for killing him. And no, it doesn't matter what Tamir Rice's parents might have done or what kind of influence they might have been on him. He was a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun in a Cleveland park, and he was shot dead within 2 seconds of officers arriving on the scene. 2 seconds. That's 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. It's simply indefensible. But before we can do something about it, we have to be able to name it and be aware that it exists. Eduardo Bonilla Silva, a sociologist at Duke University, said, "The main problem nowadays is not the folks with hoods, but the folks dressed in suits. The more we assume that the problem of racism is limited to the Klan, the birthers, the Tea Party, or even the Republican Party, the less we understand that racial domination is a collective process, and we are all in this game. We are all in this game." So what do we do? First, we have to wrap our guilty, reluctant heads around the fact that our nation truly was founded on the enslavement of Africans. The United States Capitol building was built by the enslaved, partially. We can't escape the irony that the insurrection on January 6th to stop the steal was an exercise in white supremacy. Those white, mostly men, brandishing their Confederate flags and their ugly slogans, those men don't really believe that Black Americans are Americans with the same full rights as they have. Yet the main engine for this country's initial economic growth, cotton, came directly off of the backs of enslaved people. That's an ugly history that none of us can escape. One thing we can do is to confront this head on by reimagining policing. Let's consider the history of policing. In 1704, the colony of Carolina developed the first slave patrol. It consisted of roving bands of armed white citizens who would stop, question, and punish slaves caught without a permit to travel. They were civil organizations controlled and maintained by county courts. By the 1800s, all major U.S. cities had municipal police forces in place. Patrols in the northern U.S. became useful for breaking up labor strikes and keeping immigrants out. It's not too huge of a leap to say that policing evolved to protect the haves from the have-nots, and it's grown increasingly proactive rather than reactive. There's an excellent article I read recently in our fall UU magazine that is actually titled, "Policing is the Glue of Whiteness." I am supportive of individual police officers, and I acknowledge their bravery, the work they do to protect us, and the very real risks they face in the line of duty. But they, like me, like all of us, are racist. They and we have subconscious racial bias. This is something that we have not actually dealt with. We keep having conversations about how we should tweak this or ban that. Maybe we'll pass a policy that's anti-chokehold, and that's wonderful. And maybe body cams will make a difference. The one thing that has made a difference isn't body cams, it's cell phones. But they only work when there are bystanders willing to get involved. God knows how many Black men have been murdered off camera. So if we don't get to the root of the problem, we'll be in the same place over and over again. Even if we pass 100 different policies that say, don't choke a person, don't place your knee on a person's neck. We obviously do need better policies, and we need better mechanisms to hold police accountable around their use of force. In April 2019, USA Today reported that over the previous decade, 85,000 police officers had been investigated for misconduct. 85,000. Force is necessary to use sometimes, even lethal force, but it's incontrovertible that the use of lethal force is not being applied consistently, objectively, or appropriately. And officers that use excessive force are rarely disciplined, much less fired. They must be held accountable. The unfortunate meme to, quote unquote, defund the police has garnered a lot of attention. Defund has been misconstrued to mean disband. That is obviously not going to happen. I think it would be a far better conversation if we talked about redirecting police funding. They don't need military-grade weapons like tanks. Police budgets range from 20 to 45% of discretionary funding in major metropolitan areas. For example, the NYPD has a budget of $5.6 billion. Los Angeles PD has a 2020 budget of $1.7 billion. Some of those funds could be spent creating or improving mobile crisis teams. Staff them with crisis-trained behavioral health clinicians who are culturally aware of systemic bias and racism, who can respond quickly, assess, de-escalate, treat, and assist in transporting a person to the correct level of care, instead of involving the police. Embed them in police departments. By their very existence and expertise, they can be ambassadors for racial justice. And it just makes sense to remove, or at least insulate, armed personnel from mental health crises. The fall 2020 issue of our magazine, UU World, is full of articles that challenge us to face all of the intersecting challenges confronting us at this moment in history: the pandemic, global warming, racism. Naomi Klein's Ware lecture, delivered to the General Assembly remotely last year, was an elegant explanation of how this can be a time of seismic change. Martin Luther King Jr. also delivered a lecture to the 1966 Unitarian Universalist General Assembly. He titled it, "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution." And he said, "There are some things in our nation and in our world to which I'm proud to be maladjusted. And I call upon you to be maladjusted, and all people of goodwill to be maladjusted to these things until the good society is realized." His remarks hold true for us today. We must continue to be maladjusted to the systemic racism which pervades our society, which pervades our institutions, which pervades our very culture. Some years back, the extraordinary Black writer Ta-Nehisi Coates published an article in The Atlantic about the time having come to make reparations for our original sin of slavery. I read a lot of blowback from people who objected, saying things like, "But I didn't own slaves. I'm a nice person. I don't oppress Black people. My ancestors weren't even in the country back then. Why should I be forced to pay for reparations now?" Well, the truth is anyone who is not a person of color has benefited from white supremacy, and there are ways to do reparations that could go toward repairing some of the damage wrought by systemic racism. For example, the Small Business Administration could be compelled to allocate 25% of its budgetary resources to minority-owned businesses. Mortgage lenders could be compelled to set up special programs to promote Black home ownership. And if we can't get to free college for all, we certainly could make education at all the historically Black colleges and universities free. And we can look for ways to support Black businesses and Black artists and Black charities and Black legal defense organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative. I hope that we as a culture are finally far enough away from slavery to start engaging with the injustice. I hope that we finally hit a critical mass. I hope that's what the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris portends. But we have to keep working. We must keep the pressure on. We must keep the vigils going. We must educate and confront ourselves, our own weaknesses and bias. And we must write and protest and agitate and support and show up in every way we can, including at boring local council meetings where they're discussing police budgets. We must not sleep through the revolution. The time is long overdue for us to do something about it. We must be maladjusted. Thank you.
Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's calling my name. Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's calling my name. Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? What shall I do? Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's calling my name. Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's calling my name. Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? What shall I do? Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's calling my name. Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's calling my name. Hush, ba-dum, boom, hush, ba-dum, boom, somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, what shall I do? What shall I do? Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Can you hear 'em calling my name? Hush, hush, oh hush now, somebody's calling my name. I am calling my name. Yes, I do. Calling somebody's calling my name. Oh my Lord, oh my Lord, what shall I do? What shall I do?
Thank you for joining us in worship today. Please see the credits at the end of this service for information about the music and other worship elements. And do take a moment to go to our website, uuamherst.org, and click on the giving link, or text your gift to 833-987-1968. Your generosity in online giving is the virtual equivalent of passing the offering plate, and is in addition to any pledges of ongoing financial support. Thank you in advance for your generosity. We close this time of worship as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our benediction words come from Reverend Joseph Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving.
Travel